Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Lifestyle with Dr. Moby. I'm Dr. Moby, and today we have great guest all the way from Toronto, Katy. Hi, Katy.
Hi everyone, how are you?
Good. Katy, tell us about yourself. Tell us what you do.
So by day, I'm actually a lawyer. I do urban and regional planning, so development law. And then by night, I'm a baker. I run a baker's craft. It's essentially the combination of baking and crafting. So I've expanded a little bit to offer other products. But I do baking on the side. It's a specialty, I guess. I do a lot of cakes, cupcakes. I do macaroons, mackies, which are cookies stuffed with macaroons. I do cookies, obviously, specialty cookies, and much more. I've been doing it for 10 years now, and it's something that I very much enjoy.
Okay, excellent, excellent. And great to hear that you have a daytime job and this is your passion, right?
Yes, yes. Both of them are my passion, actually. I
Both
enjoy
are.
them. Yeah.
Okay. So, do you think, tell me, when did you start about baking or cooking?
I started about 10 years ago. I had actually an injury. I used to play soccer, and I had torn my ACL while I was playing one day. And because of that, I wasn't able to do much when I had my surgery. You basically can't walk at all.
Mhm.
So I was bedridden for a couple months. And during that time, I started learning how to bake. And I've been baking now for 10, 11 years maybe. But I've been doing it on the side for the last 11 years, 10 years.
Okay, great. And I see that you have, do you do a lot of podcasting or website or?
Yeah, I don't do a lot of podcasting. This is only my second one, so it's an honor to be here. But I do post a lot on Instagram. I'm a little bit active on Facebook, but Instagram's my main social media platform where I try to post most days.
Mhm.
But I post most of my products there, or fun new baked goods that I've made, or craft goods that I've done.
Mhm. So you like to put it on Insta. Okay. So tell me a little bit about, what did you really like about baking versus cooking other stuff?
I think that I like it most because I can make it pretty. I've always been a good cook in a sense, but it's always turned out just looking like something I'm about to eat. Whereas with baking, I can make it look like a fancy cake. Like once I made a cake that looked like a monkey, sitting up monkey. So I really like the fact that I can make them into cool pictures, or I can make them into cool, like they turn out to be cool pictures when I'm done with them. So I
Mhm.
really like that aspect. And it's also fun just being able to experiment with different things. So experimenting with the recipes, I find is much easier than experimenting with cooking recipes. But I find that I'm able to make different tasting items, and macarons especially, making all the different flavor icings. So that part's great.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So that is true that you can do a lot of creativity with. I mean, you can still do with cooking, but you can do fancy colors, you can do fancy shapes, and also it tastes great, right? So
Mhm.
tell me about what are the few basic baking things anybody should be careful with or should pay attention to.
I think the biggest one is measurements. Sometimes I'm not the greatest at measuring my ingredients, but I have been doing it long enough that I kind of can eyeball it at this point, certain things. But I would say if you're new to baking, one of the biggest things is measuring it, because it really is scientific in how things work and how the different ingredients interact with each other. So if you're just guessing everything, you might end up with a slob instead of a nice, beautiful cake. It might not even cook through all the way, and making sure you use the right temperatures. I know some people who have tried baking with different temperatures and it doesn't always either cook through. I mean, when you're cooking with eggs, you really make sure that you're cooking your cake through, or your cookies through. And then like other tips that I always say is that for if you're baking and you don't have vanilla extract, you don't necessarily need it. You can replace it with another extract, or you can just completely omit it. It's not. It's. I feel like it's something that most people don't realize, and then they go out and they go to buy that one vanilla extract that they don't have, even though they have all the other ingredients, and it's just a time-consuming task. But you don't need it. But measuring is definitely the biggest thing, I would say.
Mm. Measuring is the biggest thing, yeah. And I think you have a great point because I tried to bake once, and I think you're absolutely right that was maybe one thing I didn't pay attention was the amount of different, because like you said, it has to be proportionate. You just can't eyeball, and most likely you'll end up with wrong product, right?
Yeah.
You're absolutely right about that. What about so they should buy a simple measuring scale or a simple stuff. They don't need to be spending a lot of money on it, right?
No, either a scale, you can get a scale from most places for pretty cheap, or you can buy measuring cups from like your grocery store, or anywhere. Basically, either a measuring cup or a scale, either of those are sufficient, and they're pretty relatively low in cost.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, and what about the temperature? You were saying now, are these fancy ovens, are they better, or it doesn't matter? You can just, what matters is the temperature too. So,
I like the fancy ovens. I've always liked the convection setting on the ovens, but one of my best friends is also a baker, and she finds that her stuff never works out when she uses that setting. So she likes the regular ones. Either way, I think it depends on, I guess, how often you're baking and what you're baking for, but a regular oven is sufficient. And as long as you're like preheating it to 350, if that's what the recipe calls for, then that's what's needed, and waiting until it preheats and then using it once it's preheated.
okay. So what we have is if you now these what about microwave?
You can. I don't really bake in the microwave. I've never, I've never been a microwave baker, but I know there's like recipes that you can use that make like a 1 cup brownie or 1 cup like cake in a mug. I've never tried it, so I can't speak to it. But I've never used the microwave. But I'm sure people have, and it seems to work on TikTok and Instagram when I see those videos.
Mhm. So you think it's easy to, of course, follow the convention, especially people who are beginners like me, or trying to learn. It's better to kind of stay with the convention oven, or so it does it diff it does it make a difference between the top oven and the bottom oven or not? Not
No, as long as it works.
okay. So what about inserting the temperature thermometer inside, like to monitor does it help?
It does help. It depends on what you're making. I find that when I'm making macaroons, which are very temperamental pastries, they're very like you have to have them everything has to be perfect with them for them to work. It then helps having that oven, the temperature measurement, being able to stick it in there, making sure that your oven's actually preheating and not over baking your macaroons or under baking them. But for cakes and cupcakes and those types of things, brownies, cookies, you should be fine with just popping it in once it says it's preheated at the right temperature. Unless your oven's notoriously under cooking other food too, then I would say maybe to get that. But if it's fine and you've had no problems with it, it should be fine.
And what about you mentioned a little bit about preheat. So is that something you should do always or no?
Yeah, you should always preheat your oven.
Okay, so preheat oven, and then you have prepared that. Now, what are the few things which are kind of essential or most common in most of the baking products?
Like ingredients wise?
Yeah. Mhm.
I guess it depends on what you're making, but for most things, either flour or gluten-free flour, whichever one you need, you can buy either. Um, that's always basically in every recipe. Even in macaroons, you're not using regular flour, but you're using almond flour, so you have to have some type of flour.
Mhm.
You can bake without eggs if you're trying to make vegan, so I would say eggs aren't that essential. But I would say you would have to have. You're always going to have like a balance between um, your dry ingredients and then your wet ingredients. So, like for example, either butter or oil, one of those two you're going to need. You're going to need either milk, like a wet ingredient, and then you're going to need your dry ingredients. I would also say baking powder is probably used in almost every recipe. Baking soda is a here and there. Like for example, chocolate cake uses baking soda, but vanilla cake doesn't use baking soda as often. So you can find recipes without baking soda if you're making vanilla, but not so much for chocolate. So I would say flour is probably your most important, and then you have to
Yeah,
figure out what other wet ingredients that you need to balance it, and then your baking powder.
baking powder. Okay, and so the does it has to be flour has to be refined, or it can be uh, unrefined?
It it doesn't really matter. I find that when I bake with different types of flours, they don't matter. Whole wheat. If you're baking with you can bake with whole wheat. You can bake with like unrefined, refined, bleached or unbleached. It doesn't.
Doesn't make it. Okay.
Yeah.
So do you think? What about eggs?
Eggs. So I bake sometimes with eggs, and I don't bake always with eggs. So I make a lot of I offer a lot of vegan products, so they don't have eggs in them. So I use an egg supplement, which is like a mixture of ingredients, and then you combine it with water, and it makes like a sticky like substitute for eggs, and you just substitute the egg in the recipe for that using that. But eggs, if you're using them in your main if you're actually using them in your recipe, they should be more likely than not at room temperature. Most recipes stay at room temperature, so you leave it out, or you can put it in a hot, like a cup with hot water from your tap, and leave it in there for a few minutes, and then it'll be ready at room temperature to use. But eggs are pretty important too, I would say, if you're making non-vegan recipes. They're probably in almost everything if you're not making a non-vegan recipe.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And what about adding some? So once you start baking things, do you like to also kind of do a couple of in steps, or can you just put everything together and then it will still turn out to be perfect?
You mean like when I'm doing the recipe?
Yeah, yeah. Do you try to kind of follow some steps, like some recipe I find it
Yeah.
difficult.
I find I usually follow steps. So I usually start by beating like my sugar and my butter or whatever liquid ingredient I'm using instead of butter. I'll usually beat those first and then just add in my eggs. And once I add in my eggs, you want to make sure you don't overmix. So at
Okay.
that point, you're going to start like doing it more on a low to medium setting. And then you add in your ingredients from there until you add in your ingredients based on what the recipe calls for. So sometimes they'll say to like add in some of your wet ingredients and then add in some of your dry ingredients and alternate between the two. And you just have to mix until it's just mixed in. So you don't want to overmix because you've added in your eggs at that point.
Hmm.
One step.
So still has to now. So a lot of I think these are difficult. I mean, recipes. Unfortunately, there are a lot of recipe out there on the internet, but many I find them very difficult and not really helpful. So I know they know the trick. I don't know. I had a discussion with my wife. I said, I'm gonna make something, and she said, "Okay." I said, "I know the recipe," so I downloaded, and it turned out to be disaster. So after that, she said, "You're not gonna come near the kitchen anymore. That's it." And so I know I'm sure a lot of people felt the same way.
Yeah, it's hard with Googling recipes online. Even sometimes I look at recipes and I modify them a bit if I find them online just because I look at them and I'm like, I know it's not going to work, or I know that it needs a little bit more dry or wet ingredients based on how long I've been doing this. But it is hard if you're just looking at something for the first time. I always try to look at the reviews, but
Oh, reviews. So
yeah.
is there any particular sites where you normally follow or
Pardon?
post?
Pardon?
I say, are there any particular sites where you follow or post?
I don't post my recipes. I haven't yet. I've considered maybe moving into sharing some of my recipes. I haven't done it yet. But for sites, I don't really, I've kind of created my own recipes. So I started a long time ago using a book that I got from Chapters Indigo. And from there, I kind of started Googling different recipes and figuring out which worked for me and which didn't, and then combining them in a way to make my own recipe. So the recipe that I use isn't from a website. It's just one that I've made over the last 10 years. And I continuously improve it. Like even today, I'll like change things around when I make it. If I'm finding that it's baking too dense, or if it's not baking dense enough, I'll like alter my ingredients a little bit to account for that. But I would say like if I do use the internet for something, I try to look for ones that have over 250 reviews, and I try to look for ones that have like over a 4, and then I look at those and consider those recipes. But I don't really have a website that I use,
Okay.
unfortunately.
So
I wish
so
I
you
could recommend something.
so your criteria is you usually go by reviews and some of those. So you read that some people have experimented, or at least they put some good word, or figured out it's easy to do or not. Also, I always, I find it very fascinating. Every mom has a recipe, and every daughter has, and she would always give it to daughter. Or is that true? And is that true for you?
Yes, so mine came from my nana actually on my dad's side.
Uh,
So she has a apple pie recipe and a butter tart recipe, and they're her recipes, and they're one of my favorite recipes ever. I'll never use a different recipe for those two, but it's been passed along to me, my sister, and my brother, and we all use that recipe. So that's definitely true. It's still happening. Even for my partner's family, I take recipes from them as well that they've passed on. So it's definitely true.
Yeah, I know. So they have just, but they are the only one they can make that as good. I mean, we can follow recipe, but ours will never match it. But
Never.
it is very good too. But
Yeah, you can try, but it never comes out just the exact same.
yeah, exact same perfection. No, no. Okay. So also, I want to ask you about what are the things you really enjoy making? I know there are a lot of dishes, but pick your few favorites.
So I think my few favorites would have to be I like making specialty cakes. So I loved, for example, that monkey cake that I mentioned. I love when people ask me to make cakes that are in the shapes of things. Like I made a wine bottle once, a tequila bottle. So like making cakes in the shapes of things and being able to decorate them, I find it very creative. So I really enjoy doing that. And it sometimes can be challenging if you haven't done it. Like if I haven't done it before, I find that making like a new design, it challenges me in the sense that I have to figure out how I'm going to make it work and how I'm going to design it so it turns out to be what the client wants. My next favorite thing would have to be macaroons. And most people don't like making macaroons because they're tedious and they often don't turn out the way you want them to turn out. They're very hard to make. So I completely understand why people don't like making them, but they're one of my favorite snacks. So I love making them, and I like the challenge. I like when they work out and I feel accomplished because I know they worked that time, but it can be disappointing when they don't work. Like even for me, sometimes I find that I'm making them and they're not working out the way I want to. And then I think my third thing would be like sugar cookies, decorated sugar cookies. I like making them just because they're small snacks, but they can be so pretty and they can take up so much time making one, but they turn out to be like such a magnificent creation. So they're probably my top three.
Okay. Now the other question I have is, and a lot of people are asking always, is about using Splenda or sugar substitute in baking. What is your experience with it?
My experience is not particularly great. I tend to try to use maybe low sugar or no sugar recipes more than I use Splenda. I don't like baking with Splenda. I've tried it a few times and they always turn out disastrous. So I don't like it. And I also find it's very expensive. So that's the other part. Like you're buying it from wherever you buy it from. Like in Canada, we get it from Bulk Barn. Well, I get it from Bulk Barn, and it tends to be very expensive there. So when it doesn't work out, I feel very unaccomplished. Plus, I spend so much additional money on the Splenda. So I don't tend to bake with it, but I try to make more of like low sugar or no sugar types of desserts instead.
Hmm. So you have no sugar or low sugar. Yeah, that makes sense. So do you, with no sugar now, do you also like some salty baking? Salt.
I do. I actually always bake with salt. So I always have salt in all my recipes. I use salted butter, not unsalted butter. Most recipes say unsalted butter, but I've actually never baked with unsalted butter. I like it better when it has that little salty aspect to it. You don't really taste it, but it does make a little bit difference. It's not as sweet as maybe unsalted butter cakes, or other desserts. So I always bake with salt. I always love adding that little bit of salted texture, especially if you're doing like caramel. I love adding salt to caramel. It just makes it that much better, I find.
Yeah. And what about, I think the biggest flavor altering chocolate?
Chocolate. Chocolate is not my favorite flavor.
Yeah. Okay. A lot of people
But
have.
baking with it, I find that it turns out great. Like it's one of my favorite. I find that if you're baking with chocolate, you should actually use real chocolate. I know a lot of recipes call for cocoa powder, but adding in that little bit of extra real chocolate in there really makes it more chocolatey and rich. So I always add in actual chocolate, like whether or not I melt it and then let it cool, or I throw it in as is. It's or like chopped up as is, but I always add in like real chocolate to any of my chocolate recipes.
Okay, so then any of your baking disasters, funny stories you like to share?
Baking disasters, I've definitely had a lot of those. Like for example, I made Splenda macaroons. I tried making macaroons with Splenda. This is why I hate cooking with baking with Splenda. But I tried making them with Splenda, and they never once turned out. Like not once. I tried it so many times making it with Splenda that it just was a disaster. I tried like 4 batches, and it was awful. It was awful. And then I tried it right with regular sugar, and it turned out perfect. So I won't be trying that again.
Mhm.
Another one is cookies. I always find that sometimes if I'm trying, like I was making a new recipe for my cookies in order to make my Mackie, so I was experimenting with my cookie recipe for a while,
Mhm.
and some of it came out disastrous. Like my cookies, one of my cookie batches melted right off the pan. So it was not that great. I had to clean my entire oven after, which was not a fun thing to do. But there's been a lot of disasters. I've once dropped a cake and then had to remake it. It's like little things like that. Like my dog walks by my feet and I trip over her, and then there goes.
Oh,
Yeah. So.
that's nice. Okay, so any other advice you would like to share for my audience?
I would say that if you like baking, to watch a lot of YouTube videos, YouTube or Instagram sometimes has those new reels or whatever it's called. It's a new feature on Instagram, but I would say to watch as many YouTube videos as you can. Try different recipes if one's not working for you, if you don't like it. Try, or you can get like a cookbook. Look for like people who are famous bakers. They tend to have pretty good recipes. Or if your local bake shop sells their recipes, that's a great option too. But I would say the biggest tip I would say is to watch YouTube videos. As little like as you might not think they're as helpful as they could be, but they tend to be very helpful. I even watch them when I'm doing something new. I watch them. Like there's you can make like I'm not sure what it's called, but it's like a type of sugar, and you can melt it to make it into like a glass ball, for example. And I'm learning how to do it now, but I'm watching a lot of YouTube videos to do it. So I would always say to watch YouTube videos if you want to try something new with baking, and make sure you measure your ingredients. Always measure.
Yeah, yeah, that's a big advice. I think anybody can remember. Okay, well, thank you for coming and sharing your passion. One of your passion, and your other is your being a lawyer. That is very well taken. So we didn't have time or discussion on that, but I think come back anytime would be like.
Thank
So
you.
happy to have you. Thank you, and we learned a lot about baking, and especially person like me gained some confidence.
Good. I'm glad.
Maybe the mistake was measurement, maybe not right. Okay, and take care and stay
Thanks
well.
for having me.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.